There's an old saying, to the victors belong the spoils.
There's another old saying, Senator. Don't piss down my back and tell me it's raining.
No, stop talking.
Oh, I'm sorry. Did I break your concentration?
I'm walking here! I'm walking here!
Here's a fact, I don't know whether you know or not.
Anyone?
It's been confusion from the word go.
You know, that's just like, your opinion, man.
Surely you can't be serious.
I am serious. And don't call me Shirley.
The voice said to me, I want you to tell the people the truth. Not an easy thing to do because the people don't want to know the truth. And I said, you're kidding. What the hell should I know about the truth? But the voice said to me, don't worry about the truth. I will put the words in your mouth.
We are the Midnight Sunrise, a show by artists, for artists, covering the ins and outs of the alternative community. Hello out there in Radio Land. Welcome back to the Midnight Sunrise. You heard what the man said. Don't piss down our back and tell us it's raining. Welcome to show number 2. I'm your host, Charles Shaw. I'm here with Android Jones and Random Rab. We are streaming live here on kmhd2.org. Say hello to everybody, gentlemen.
Hello, Earth. Thanks for turning in.
Hi, everybody. It's good to be with you guys tonight.
We really want to thank you guys for giving so much support to our first show. We had thousands of listeners, and we hope you guys enjoy what we're doing. It's the beginning of a long adventure. So just before we get started here, wanted to let you know that this show is coming to you from the road. I am currently in San Francisco. Andrew is in Colorado, and Rab is in San Diego. So for all you working artists out there, we salute you for your hard work on the road, entertaining the people. Okay, let's get started with the show today. Our topic is the F.U.B.A.R report. And what we mean by that is we're going to talk about some current events and really F.U.B.A.R stories in the news, things that we've been talking about the last week or two that have piqued our interest. And so we've got about half a dozen interesting stories to discuss. I think that this one definitely is a top 5 under any circumstances. And this one is a no-brainer, really. We're talking about the drought that's going on the West Coast, and in particularly California. Last week, Vice magazine put out a feature story on this. Los Angeles is finally starting to run out of water. And a companion story in KTVU News, which is out of San Jose, drought forces state officials to turn off water supply. Amid California's most crippling drought of modern times, state officials on Friday announced they will not allocate water to agencies that serve 25 million people and nearly 1 million acres of farmland. Okay, so this is something that has been brewing for a very long time. And water usage has been a very serious issue on the West Coast. For any of you who don't know this, everything pretty much south of Sacramento was made possible by damming and redirecting the Colorado River and building the irrigation canal that cuts through the California Central Valley, which is now essentially the breadbasket of America, one of the 2 major farming areas in the entire country. So this is pretty big. And this portends water rationing. This portends an entire shift in lifestyle for everybody, again, south of the Sacramento region. Did either of you two gentlemen get a chance to look at this Vice article I'm talking about here?
Yeah, I have checked it out. I've checked out a couple of other articles. I've also experienced some of these problems firsthand just where I live up in Ashland. We've last year our main reservoir actually went dry, and we had to reroute water to our backup reservoir, Immigrant Lake. This year it looks like we might run out of both. So they're actually expediting a plan to pipe in water. They're building like a small pipe to a different water source because we actually might run out of water this year for the first time in my memory.
This is in Ashland.
This is in Ashland, Oregon, yeah.
And you guys had like 3 feet of snow or something like that too? You had that crazy snowstorm?
Yeah, well, we had one snowstorm, but that was it. That's all the precipitation we've had. We've had a little bit of precipitation in the last week, but it's not enough we need a lot more. I mean, normally the Mount Ashland ski area opens on Thanksgiving. I just drove by it last week, and there was, hardly anything up there. So and we also had a 180 acres burn, I think a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, near Ashland. So that's pretty much unheard of as far, to have a forest fire this time of year. Normally everything's saturated. So it's been really hard times, and one of the big problems too is that our main water source is actually a really clean water source, but when you have to reroute all these different from these different places, they have to add a lot more chemicals to the water, so the water you do get is of a lower quality. And I think that for LA it's even more extreme, where they're bringing the water from and what they're taking it from, and when you're driving down the I-5 and they have all those signs, the Congress created Dust Bowl.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Yep.
That all stems from that's what we're looking at when all these water sources are rerouted to places like Los Angeles.
Yep. They're calling this the worst. The driest the region has been in the 163 years of formal record keeping, but they're saying that this is really the worst it's been in 500 years. 500 years. And, there's 25 million people in the San Angeles metro region, so that's Los Angeles to San Diego. And there's 40 million people in the state of California, and more than half of them live south of Sacramento, right? I was just in LA, and the reservoir is up in the Grapevine, and the reservoir up in Silver Lake, all of them are, 10, 15 feet down. But I think the scariest thing I've seen in months was when I moved up to Portland and drove across Lake Shasta and saw how far Lake Shasta was down.
I think it's 300 feet below normal level.
I mean, 300 feet.
Is that, and actually I was just talking to the DoLab guys about the new DoLab, the new lightning in a bottle site, which I think is called Lake Bradley, which is a reservoir in Northern California, I think 2 hours south of Santa Cruz, I think. But they said that basically it looks like, there is no reservoir there. It's nothing. It's just what were peninsulas are now hills.
Wow.
So the landscape is changing all around us for sure.
Yeah. What's it like out in California or out in Colorado there, Doc, with water and snow?
Well, we definitely had our fair share dose of water with the floods that came through here a few months ago. At the moment, we just got through. It's been snowing a lot. We're having a really, really beautiful winter, actually. It was probably around 12, 14 inches of snow around the farm. And some of it's starting to melt away. It's been really cold. I had some really cold nights, but I think the experience we had going through the flood was something that was so unprecedented to us. It's interesting. It's kind of like a feast or famine. Too much water or not enough. There's obviously there's something. I think the Earth goes through a number of different cycles right now. Whether we want to talk about that's man-made or that's just meteorological occurrences that are happening. It's definitely it definitely deserves all of our attention, and it really kind of brings into mind how much of our world we take for granted on a daily basis,
right?
And how sensitive everything is. Even the amount of rain we had would have, if it was, as they said, the precipitation we had during. It was only raining pretty much straight for about a week here. That caused all the floods here in Colorado. But they said if we had that amount of precipitation during the winter, it would have been like 14 feet of snow is what they were actually projecting, the amount of moisture we had. So
it's amazing.
Right. So how many news stories have you guys seen recently that use the term anomalous weather? Would you say roughly maybe half or more are using that term? Because I see that term all over the place. Anomalous weather.
Yeah.
Right?
Well,
okay.
At least in that or a paraphrase of that concept.
Right.
Yeah.
So you guys are familiar with geoengineering, right? You've heard of this.
Sure.
It's otherwise known as, weather modification or chemtrails or what have you. And there's a big dispute over whether this actually exists, whether it's a conspiracy theory, I don't like to use that term, but we'll just use it for ease's sake here, or whether it's a legitimate thing. And so this drought is actually a really good entry to talk about geoengineering. And so I'm going to advance a theory, okay? And this is just a theory. I don't have any concrete proof of this, but for those people out there who are familiar with geoengineering, it supposedly began as a global program in 1997. And around that time, people started reporting that the trails that they would see in the sky behind planes wouldn't go away. And in places where this was particularly heavy, people started talking about various immune disorders and respiratory disorders. Eventually, a guy from New Mexico named Clifford Carnicom went out and took a bunch of samples and found that what was being sprayed in the air was a heavy metal particulate aerosol spray, primarily aluminum oxide and barium oxide. And so he went and did a little poking around, and what he found were some patents that were filed in the early 90s that were pretty much this type of thing. It was an aerosol spray of aluminum oxide that is to be put in the ionosphere in order to reflect sunlight back into space. So this is a patent filed in 1991. In that time, from that late 90s period until now, we've seen some of the most extreme weather of our lifetimes. We've seen the Hurricane Katrina, we've seen the tsunami in Japan and in the Philippines. We've seen these, series of 8.0 earthquakes all over the world, cataclysms on a scale that they, have been attributing to climate change and saying this is what's going to happen with CO2 in our atmosphere. But there's this whole other factor to global warming and climate change that nobody's talking about, and that's geoengineering. And the reason is that what we've been able to determine is that it was picked up by the Pentagon, by DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Project Agency. And that technology, which apparently has been around for a while and came out of Nikola Tesla's work, was exploited for military applications. In other words, weather weaponry, the ability to bend the jet stream and dump monsoons or snowstorms or hurricanes on another population. Now, how much of this stuff have you guys looked into in your travels out there? The whole geoengineering thing.
I've looked into it a little bit. I don't doubt that there are attempts being made to make this happen, although I personally am not sure if I see the kind of evidence that leads me to believe that this is actually working. Like, I don't know what type of tools they could possibly use to create a shift in the jet stream besides global warming itself.
Here's how it works. The ionosphere is an electrocharged part of our atmosphere, right? And so it can be manipulated by putting energy through it. So the planes spray the particulate into the atmosphere. They spray this electroconductive substance, this aluminum aerosol spray. And then by focusing HAARP energy, which is High Atmosphere Auroral Research Program, that's what it's called, the specific term. What it really means is advanced microwaves and radio waves, which are focused into the ionosphere in places where this spray has been. And by focusing energy into the ionosphere, it causes it to either expand or contract. When it expands, it bends the jet stream back one way, and when it contracts, it pushes it the other way. I've also read that they have this refined down so much that they know, because of the fluid nature of the jet stream, that if they want to create rain, for example, in Oklahoma and Nebraska to feed wheat, they need to seed the jet stream up in Seattle or in Vancouver or in Alaska and have it travel down the jet stream until it becomes a storm in the middle of America. Okay? So We're going to take a break here and come back and talk a little bit more about this geoengineering thing because it's a big, fascinating topic. You are listening to the Midnight Sunrise. We are streaming live here on kmhd2.org. We'll be right back in a minute. Hi there and welcome back to the Midnight Sunrise. We were just talking about the drought on the West Coast, and we brought up the topic of geoengineering or weather modification. And so right before the break, we were talking about the way that this purportedly works. Now, I've come to find that there's lots of other applications that this technology apparently has. And so a really good source for this, for people that want to look at something that's credible and researched and has documentation, is a series of articles that have been published on global research. And the URL for that is globalresearch.ca. Okay? And so there's a whole series on weather weaponry. And also the other applications of this, which include the ability to block satellites, the ability to essentially use a new form of radar that allows you to look around the curvature of the Earth like an MRI operates. And then there's also these theories that competing powers can essentially use this against each other. Okay? So the question is why and how? And the answer that seems to be the most acceptable or the most plausible is disaster capitalism. And I don't know if our listeners are familiar with that, but it is a concept that came out of a book that Naomi Klein wrote. And disaster capitalism is the new growth economy. The basics on disaster capitalism is that in an era where the Earth is changing, the climate is shifting, and there are greater and greater natural disasters, this to the economic sector becomes a new growth area. It becomes an area where, billions can be made on reconstruction efforts, on emergency services, right? Now, if you look at the history of warfare has often been used for this exact purpose, which is to essentially destroy a society and then rebuild it. You guys follow me on this?
Yeah, we're with you, Charles.
Okay. So now what I want to talk about, since we haven't really, I've kind of gone off here and tried to explain some of the basics. Now let's talk about some of the counter arguments and why, like Rab, for example, you think that this doesn't really exist.
Well, I mean, my first question would be, who benefits from what's happening now, such as like the drought in California, and I just don't see where, Are you trying to imply that you think that this is a geoengineering crisis?
Well, I'm not necessarily implying that, but let's look at some evidence, and then we'll draw our own conclusions, okay? So there's lots of theories out there and suggestions that various earthquakes and tsunamis have been caused by this technology. But there's also a debate whether or not we actually have the ability to do something like that. So let's look at something simple. Let's look at just the ability to create rain and or create drought by bending the jet stream. Now, 3 years ago, in 2011, there was a historic drought in Russia, our major competitor. And the grain fields in Russia are what feeds the Middle East. It's the breadbasket of the Middle East. So Russian grain becomes Middle Eastern bread. Because the grain harvest didn't come in 2011, that sparked the riots in the Middle East that ultimately led to the Arab Spring revolts. They originally began as food riots in Egypt because the prices of bread went up so high because the Russian grain harvest didn't come in. Now, if you're looking at this from the perspective of geostrategic powers, how is the easiest and most effective way to destabilize enemy populations but destroy their food supply? Okay.
Yeah.
So conversely, a year later, unprecedented drought starts hitting the West Coast and the middle of the country, which is our breadbasket. When I was in Copenhagen last September for giving a presentation, I showed a picture that had been taken that week, and it showed exactly the Central Valley of California and exactly the breadbasket in the Midwest as periods or areas of high drought. I mean, they were full on red, the lowest that they had ever been. And those are our two food producing regions. So I present this to you and say, what do you see when you see a pattern like this, right?
Yeah. Well, Charles, I think, obviously the idea of weaponizing the weather is not only terrifying, but it's something that, you could see from any strategic point of view would be so highly sought after, because not only does it give you pretty much like a clandestine way of controlling different factors, it's also a way of attacking another person, whether it's attacking the people that you're controlling or another nation, without the accountability that any other type of traditional weapon would have. And I think where it's obvious to see the strategies that one would have, just from the ability, one thing that I think is kind of interesting is that, that I don't think a lot of people know is that, extreme weather conditions are actually sold as like derivatives, say on it's Chicago Mercantile Exchange, because knowing the ability to know in advance what's going to happen gives you a huge amount of power. That information, that knowledge is power. So the place where I think this gets particularly terrifying is the fact that because weather modification, and I want to say a lot of this I'm just kind of speaking out of speculation too, just as a disclaimer, but in the theoretical world, the idea of any kind of military taking advantage of technology to control the weather, the scary aspect is that it would all have to be done in, like I said, a clandestine way where it would be very top secret. It's not something you advertise, and it's an advantage that you wouldn't ever want to give any of your enemies about. I don't think they have any inner summits where they all kind of check in on how they're modifying the weather. And because modifying the weather, any kind of modification you make to nature for a short-term gain, without any type of precedent on the long-term circumstances, say if we were the only ones doing that would be bad enough. But I think it gets exponentially more dangerous when you imagine multiple governments modifying the weather for all of their own agendas simultaneously. Can obviously result in just a catastrophic consequences that there's never been any precedent towards the actual result of that kind of damage on a system of nature that's so sensitive. It's taken billions of years to get to the point that it is right now.
Right. Okay, so what if I told you that by certain accounts, the United States, Russia, China, India, Israel, the UK, and South Africa all have this technology, and by extension that means Australia, because the United States and Australia have a partnership in this, in the same way that India and Israel have a partner in this.
Well, it's also this isn't anything new either. Like in '67, even in like Vietnam, we had if you're familiar with the Operation Popeye.
Right.
It was like a cloud seeding program. We managed to create, over extend the monsoon season like 30 to 45 days, and that gave us a tactical advantage because we knew what was coming when the enemy didn't. And it's when you think about this, you think about all the top secret projects, all the different areas, all the applications, whether they're benign, whether they're trying to increase yields on crops, whether they're trying to frustrate or deter the enemy.
when you add them all together in the context of how extremely sensitive a totally taxed ecosystem is on the resources we deplete from it, it's a nightmare in the making.
Yeah, I mean, think of it this way. I don't think that this is a nefarious thing entirely. I think that it's obvious that the weaponized aspect of this program is highly classified. And you can tell that it's highly classified because the government doesn't even acknowledge it. They don't even deny it. They don't acknowledge it at all. That's a sign of top secret. You know, when something isn't even acknowledged or it's just openly derided. But imagine that this is a technology that was originally invented with good intention. And imagine that, like, it's being used primarily for the purposes that they're stating, that to reflect sunlight, to try to mitigate this, and also to try to mitigate drought conditions. I mean, imagine if we're just in a solar cycle right now where we're just getting cooked by the sun and they're trying to save us. Okay, that's great. But it makes sense that they wouldn't tell us, because how do you get consent from 7 billion people to experimentally spray and tamper with the weather system, right? You can't. I mean, the liability alone under international law has got to be staggering. But it makes you wonder where that 10 trillion that disappeared from the Pentagon went, right? $10 trillion missing. You know, 2.5 of those were announced the morning of 9/11. And that quickly disappeared. And then somebody did a follow-up story a couple months ago and said, oh yeah, by the way, remember that 2.5 trillion that was missing? It's now 10 trillion. So the problem is we're getting all of these like potential side effects now. And one of them obviously is aluminum toxicity, which is a huge problem because it leads to autism and it leads to Parkinson's and it leads to Alzheimer's and all kinds of neurological impairments. And I got friends who live up by Alcoa plants, like up in Washington State and stuff, and the Alzheimer's rates up there are ridiculous, you know. Now we find out that Monsanto has patented an aluminum-resistant seed line. So this is where exactly, and that's where everybody starts getting crazy. Now, why would Monsanto go and patent an aluminum-resistant seed line unless they knew something that we didn't? Now let's talk about this for a second. This is a fact, and this is something that is easy to find because it's a registered patent. Okay, so obviously this means that they're trying to adapt for an aluminum toxic soil. Well, I don't think everybody's burying their old Reynolds wrap out in their front lawn or in the farm fields, so where's all that aluminum coming from? That requires a multi-billion-dollar corporation to alter their seed line, which is essentially their bread and butter. This is the most frustrating thing about this, is that for the people that look into this, you know, it takes years to like understand it, and then you try to explain it like this, and you sound like you're batshit insane, you know?
I guess I don't really understand the whole Monsanto aluminum resistant thing completely.
So let's imagine that, there's 10,000 flights a day over the continental United States, or whatever the number is, okay? And then how many of these are spraying aerosols for whatever purpose, good purpose or bad purpose? But for whatever reason, the net effect is that all that aluminum is falling onto the ground.
Yeah, but I guess I'm looking up right now. It's that the soil is naturally already about 7% aluminum. And that what the problem is that when the aluminum becomes acidified, and then it releases it in such a way that becomes toxic. So if they really wanted to get us, they drop acid instead of aluminum. I would think.
So how do you know how aluminum becomes acidified?
Well, by creating an acidic soil.
Like using too much like
aluminum because there's natural aluminum is already a natural component in the soil. It's when it becomes acidic, it becomes a toxin.
Damn it, Jim! I'm an artist, not a farmer.
Well,
working on it.
So I'm looking at a picture here from the Vice article, and they're showing the actual picture of the jet stream. I don't know if you're looking at the same one there, guys, but you'll see that there's a huge bend in the jet stream that comes up from Baja California and goes up to just south of Alaska, and then it bends all the way back down on the other side of the Sierra Nevada mountains, and the Rockies and dips all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico, through Florida, and then back up the Atlantic coast. That's how far the jet stream is bent. So the whole center of the country is basically being frozen by an Arctic cold front that's just sitting over there. And meanwhile, the high pressure coming up from the south is creating and perpetuating this drought. So we're going to take a break here. You're listening to The Midnight Sunrise. I'm your host, Charles Shaw. I'm with Android Jones and Random Rab. We have been talking about geoengineering, droughts, and Southern California. We're streaming live here on kmhd2.org. We'll be right back. Hello there, welcome back to the Midnight Sunrise. I'm your host, Charles Shaw. I'm here with Android Jones and Random Rab. And we're going to shift gears here a little bit. We were talking about some current events in the news here on the F.U.B.A.R report. But I want to talk about a little bit of a different story. And this is something that I came across about a week or two ago. And it's about a 21-year-old artist in Baltimore, a woman named Lyndsay Bottos, who is a senior at the Maryland Institute College of Art. And I guess she's a photography major, and she's been studying gender studies. And she's an attractive woman with like a dark hair and a pixie haircut. She's got, you know, tattoos and really red lipstick. And as part of her, she put up an art exhibit that she's calling Anonymous. And what she did was put a bunch of selfies up, and then took the comments that people would post underneath them and put one comment on each photo. And they were some of the worst, most vicious and cruel things I think I have ever seen. And it really kind of opened up an avenue for discussing what people's behavior is like on the internet these days, and why we have devolved into such cruelty, and what this kind of bullying culture and this criticism culture is. Now, this is a woman that did not, you know, her pictures were just pictures. They didn't have copy, they didn't have text, they didn't have context, but people would say things like, "Oh my God, you're so pretty and cool and unique. I want to be just like you so I can sit on my ass all day and post pictures of myself and embroider quirky phrases on stuff. How original. Get a fucking life and grow up. Nobody wants to see your face or your art." She doesn't shave her armpits. So somebody says, "Oh wow, you don't shave. You're so revolutionary and unique. Why don't you grow the fuck up?" Over and over and over. They comment on the fact that she's skinny. They comment on the fact that she has tattoos. Everything that you could possibly rip a person about, they attack this poor woman about. This 26-year-old woman.
As a musician, I experience this kind of thing all the time. You know, I've noticed that as the more well-known certain aspects of Random Rab become known, the more kind of you get some weird comments. I actually had a guy comment onto my SoundCloud page the other day. I honestly have not had very little negative feedback on SoundCloud. I can't even remember anything, but but this guy kind of ripped into one of my songs. You know, he said it sucked, and so I made the mistake of just deleting his comment, and he came back with a vengeance.
Oh yeah.
And started just ripping into everything and just, you know, cussing me out and putting comments on all my tracks about how everything sucked and this and that. You know, I shouldn't have even acknowledged him in the first place. I had to block him, you know, but it's just it's tough because, you know, here I know that, like, you know, I'll get like hundreds and hundreds of positive comments, and then I get one guy on there who's just got, you know, some problem.
Right.
And it goes deep, you know. You can't help it. Like it almost nullifies all the other stuff. I've definitely had a couple years ago. I had a guy. He wrote like almost a full page assault on me after seeing one of my shows.
What did he say?
It really made me kind of angry because he was saying that the whole club was just like wanted me to stop, but I just kept playing. But, you know, it was like this awesome sold out show in New York that I was like, it was great, it was a good time. So he was creating kind of this, like, he made up like this story to kind of back himself up. And so my initial I felt so enraged, you know, I wanted to get up there and kind of like, no, you're wrong, but you know, I just can't do that. And so instead I just kind of internalized it, and it definitely, it goes deep, you know, it hurts. It's like it's hard to ignore those types of comments. It's almost like best not to even read them, even though if I see it happen to someone else, it's like, oh yeah, well obviously that person's a troll, don't even acknowledge it. But when you're on the receiving end of a troll, it's kind of, it can be challenging to know what the right thing to do is in response.
Right.
Yeah, it's tough, you know. I mean, the internet's it's an amazing mirror for all of for humanity's insecurity and our I think this is a good example of just the manifestation of the self-loathing that a lot of us have for ourselves and our lives, and it's a very convenient way to use technology to project our own self-hatred onto other people when we see aspects of themselves, whether it's their success or whether it's laughing at their failures. There's just a deep part of the human condition that needs some type of a fall guy to either justify itself or to share in its own misery. And I think this is just another one of those examples that's maybe put a little clearer on how that happens, because, you know, I feel the rab. You know, I have my own collection of haters out there as well, and it's unfortunate that if you're unwilling to do kind of the own personal work in yourself, that people need an outlet like that, you know. But I'd be really surprised if any of the people that are actually posting any of these thoughts or comments are really getting any type of deep satisfaction out of that gesture, beyond kind of the momentary rush of adrenaline of being able to express themselves and cut down somebody else. But it just comes into, I mean, it's pretty classic just abusive behavior. If you look into any type of abusive relationships and you look at, you always want to look at, you know, what's the benefit someone's getting out of that, and it's usually some type of expression of power from the powerless. But I think it's important to really, you know, we could look at the individual people, and I'm sure we could find the things in their life or why they're doing this, but I think it's important to look at it at just the larger context and kind of the causal factors of why this exists. And I think that really just comes from people's inner feeling of how powerless they are when you know, we live in a culture and a society that kind of that takes our power, whether it's our government or our economy or the powers that be, that are just trying to, on a constant basis, is castrate us from our natural sovereignty and our, you know, the divine rights we have as individuals and human beings on the planet.
Well, what do you think about, I mean, okay, first of all, you know, I'm glad I don't have any of these problems, because my social media is just a 24-hour love fest all the time. But I mean, to be fair, you know, both of you guys, you know, let's be fair, you guys aren't exactly offensive people. I mean, you make beautiful artwork. Rab makes beautiful music. You guys generally make people feel very good, and yet you still get these types of responses from people. Now, you take someone like me who, intentionally tries to stir the pot because I'm trying, to stir up discussion and try to, shake the tree a little bit. And I spend a good portion of my day, with one after another after another. And not only that, but as a political activist, I also have the paid trolls that are paid to disrupt discussions on my social media and on other people's social media. But that's a whole nother ballgame. What I'm really interested in is the psychology behind why this is happening. And, I have some theories, and one of them is that, every time we flip on the news or something, you see some, millionaire with silicone in their face and in their chest, making some snarky comment about some aspect of society or other. And anything that doesn't conform to this like regular image, gets mocked openly. And so that message that gets passed on is that you have to mock something that isn't like you, right? And more than that, how much does this play into capitalism and the competition basis of capitalism, and this idea that like we're all competing against each other, so we have to tear down each other if we see that somebody is getting a piece of the pie that we don't necessarily think they deserve, right?
Yeah. Well, like I said, it's just the darker reflection of our own individual shadow. If you think about, we all have those feelings. We all have those feelings of you'll see something, I think we're all guilty of feeling jealous over someone else's success at some point or another. I think it's a natural aspect, but it's important to, not be consumed by that. I think what I try to, and I'm so far from perfect at it, but whenever those feelings kind of arise in myself, I try to take that as kind of a trigger to understanding. I try to just kind of sit with that emotion and kind of be the observer of like, where is this jealousy, where is this resentment, where is this coming from? And it's usually coming from some type of self-created scarcity, as if there wasn't enough success out there for everyone, or there wasn't enough attention. And it's a good, for me, it's kind of an alert and a reminder, and it's an opportunity to kind of look at my own shadow, because I think a lot of these really just come from our ignorance of each of our individual shadows, and it plays out in a way that if it engages our emotions, and we kind of succumb to that feeling, then we're in it, and we're not able to see it for the representation that it is and make any progress. Because if you're not understanding where it's coming from, if you're not understanding that the anger you have is really just an emanation of yourself and something that you haven't put enough focus in, then it's just going to perpetuate itself and get worse and find more reasons and more excuses to be angry. And then this, the anonymity of the internet gives people an amazing platform to express that venom and that toxin without any, external consequences, even though in actuality the consequences on an internal level are far-reaching and incredibly destructive.
Okay.
Well, I think you're right, Andrew. I think there's one of the big issues with this is that there's is empathy. We all have cruel thoughts that run through our heads, but a lot of times, I think it's just totally natural to feel, like you said, feel jealous at times or angry, and for reasons that aren't really justified, and you tend to process it. And when you talk to that person face to face, the sense of empathy keeps you from saying something stupid that you might regret. But the internet, being anonymous, I think really gives people to just let out all those dark thoughts that probably shouldn't be expressed. I know growing up in Indiana, one of the biggest one of the biggest insults was weird. Like, he's weird. That's weird. Like, that was something that I heard all the time. Everything was weird, and if it was weird, it was bad. And people always said that. And it wasn't until I came out to the West Coast that weird was celebrated. But I think that those same people that say this weird, that weird, they would never really say it to that person's face. It's sort of just kind of like a behind their back kind of thing. But that was also before the internet. When I lived in Indiana, for all you kids listening out there was a time before the internet.
No, surely you're lying. Surely you're lying.
But now I think there's a platform for all of that kind of that puke of disgust that comes out of people.
Yeah. I'm greatly dismayed by this on a sociological level, and I think it really portends a kind of like, disintegration of society. But before we go out into our next commercial break, just as an interesting little trivia point, tell us about the first time that you were shown the internet, or you were aware of the internet.
Well, I think I remember it, just a photo of watching it. Probably, gosh, it seemed like it took like 15 minutes to load, but it was the most amazing thing. I remember before that, our hard drive was a tape, like a cassette tape.
Yeah.
We had like the TI computer.
What about you,
finally
Doug?
got that.
Gosh, it's kind of fuzzy when I go back into memory banks. I definitely, something I'll never forget is just getting like the AOL disc and that sound. You guys know the sound. It's like
the modem sound.
I've got a lot of memories of that. That'll never go away. Yeah. But yeah, I think I'm so grateful to have had a childhood pre-internet and to have a steady stream of consciousness, seeing the evolution of it to where we are today, because it's just amazing to contemplate these generations that are growing up now that were never living in a world without the internet. Could you imagine if you had Facebook in elementary school? I mean, just I don't know how your elementary school or your junior high experience was, but mine had various shades of gray to it, being a little bit of an outcast, and I don't even want to create a fantasy of what that would have been like if there was a social media engine behind my own inner insecurities growing up as a kid. What a nightmare.
Yeah. Well, I went to college with no internet, and it didn't show up until I was 24 years old. And every Tuesday night I used to hang out with a group of guys, and we would play Sega hockey and smoke bongs and watch NYPD Blue. And one of these nights we gathered for our Tuesday night thing, and this guy Greg was on his computer, and I asked him what he was doing, and he's like, "Oh man, there's this amazing thing called the World Wide Web. It's like a computer that's connected to like all these other computers everywhere around the world." And he downloaded a page for me, and I didn't even get it. Okay, we're gonna take a break here on the Midnight Sunrise. We are streaming live on kmhd2.org. Listen to some music. Welcome back to the Midnight Sunrise. I'm your host, Charles Shaw. I'm here with Android Jones and Random Rab. Say hello to the folks out there, gentlemen.
Hello, folks.
Greetings and salutations.
So we're on the F.U.B.A.R report here this week, and we're talking about some of the more F.U.B.A.R stories and current events going on out there. And of course, how could we have this show this week without talking about the untimely passing of a true artist, Phillip Seymour Hoffman, who died of a heroin overdose on the day of our first show while we were pretty much in studio. This kind of rolls off of our discussion from the last segment about Lyndsay Bottos' case and, online cruelty. I was talking about this. This was a wonderful opportunity for those of us in the drug policy reform movement to talk about, how our drug laws and prohibition are, we're behind, this situation in many respects with Phillip Seymour Hoffman. And so there was an article going around that said, Phillip Seymour Hoffman had no free will and neither do you. And this was a very popular article. And it basically was like a 12-stepper that was going on and on and on about how he was powerless and he had no free will and he had he had a disease and he couldn't control himself. Well, that's a very antiquated view of addiction for those people out there that are familiar with it. And the progressive view, the view that people are embracing more and more these days, is the harm reduction view. So I got into a discussion about this where I, went and said on somebody else's wall, like, I don't subscribe to this belief. I think that this, permanently makes people a victim, that they can't, they can get past it. You do have free will. And it started a very heated argument. Okay, so we had a disagreement about something very important where millions of lives are at stake. And I lost my sister in July to this disease, and I lost her in part because she refused to embrace any progressive therapies. And so some of us think this is really important. We want to talk about it. Phillip Seymour Hoffman's death is very important. This is a critical issue that we have going on. There's, anywhere from 26 to 80 million addicts in the United States. And so, I'd like to kind of see what your reactions were to his passing, and what were some of the discussions you guys were seeing about this.
We created a new era of addiction in this country with the pharmaceutical business. I've watched, I have some people who are close to me who became addicted to some very powerful pharmaceuticals, and a lot of these are analogs to heroin. But I do think, so there is kind of like this, it's a trap that people can get into very easily. Whether they have free will, I mean, of course they have free will. I know with Phillip Seymour Hoffman, I mean, he was sober for it's like 23 years, and then he, at some point along the way, he made a choice to go back into using substances. And I think that's what, it really is a choice. It's a hard choice, but at the end of the day, it is a choice, and I think that it is very dangerous to imply that people are powerless against this, because I think that only creates more addiction. There's a psychology that, I know, like with AA and NA, that's a big, kind of this idea that although those programs may be effective in some ways, I think that they can kind of backfire for people who feel they want to maintain their free will and are taught otherwise. They don't have the power and therefore give in easier because they think that they have no choice when they do have a choice.
It's also an excuse too, and that was, I certainly used it as an excuse when it was convenient at the time. I said, oh, well, I have a disease, you can't judge me. And that's a very comfortable place for people to hide in the disease place. But to say, like you said, Rab, that he didn't have a choice or didn't have free will in this is kind of preposterous. And not only that, but when we're dealing with so many people that are suffering, one thing that I've learned in my travels with addiction, and this has been a lifelong struggle for me in particular, is that addiction, from my experience, is not a disease so much as it is a symptom of trauma.
I think that, I think that's really important it's kind of what we're talking about before. It's what addiction is. Addiction is a symptom. It's just a symptom to the much larger problem, and it's important not to get too focused in on this or heroin or barbiturate or stimulant or all the different ways that it masks. I've personally, I make no secret about it. I've been battling different addictions throughout my entire life, and it's offered an incredible amount of kind of introspection to witness yourself kind of go through the whole cycle of falling into something, seeing the temptation, resisting it, and giving in. But from what I've learned through my process and my different stages of recovery is, when you get down to the root and the cause of addictions, that, I believe that all addictions come from an attempt to escape or to run away or an avoidance of pain.
Yes.
And I think it's really the pain that needs to be the focus here. And I think it'd be I'd like to see more conversations talking about what was the real pain, the acute pain that he was experiencing beyond the causality of what actions he took to try to alleviate that pain. I'm sure being a celebrity and living in that kind of an illusion where I think a celebrity at any level like Seymour's, I wouldn't consider myself a celebrity by any means, but I love the fact that I can, go to a grocery store and go to the airport and nobody knows who I am. I'm very happy with that. I hope that's something that never changes. If you could imagine what, it's difficult enough just to be a human being on this planet as it is, but to be a human being and to be recognized and have all of your interactions either watched or judged, to the fact where nothing you could do anymore. You would never be able to have that anonymity of just being a guy walking down the street once you achieve a certain amount of notoriety, where I think, celebrityism definitely is its own curse within itself. And I think it's an unfortunate thing that once somebody reaches that level and they realize it, they get to a point where there's no going back. It's kind of, celebrityism is kind of a permanent solution to a short-term problem of not having enough love or attention or trying to express yourself. And I think really the focus is the pain. The focus is, why is there so much pain? Why are we in a culture that promotes and creates, and how are we regulating that pain? And what are the options we see? And it's unfortunate that we do have a multi-billion-dollar pharmaceutical industry that, like a Candyman, caters to every type of pain possible, and not focused on actually creating any sort of healing, but only perpetuating the pain and giving minor solutions. And something that I learned about addiction too, I had a really close friend of mine in college that was a heroin addict, and he was an amazing guy. He is an amazing guy. And I just remember a lot of experiences knowing him, knowing his person. He was an awesome human being. He was creative, talented, funny, super intelligent. But it allowed me to really kind of watch. It was the first time I'd known someone that had a heavy addiction to heroin,
right? And
to actually like firsthand kind of see the cycle of it. And what's really unfortunate about it is that heroin is it's a slippery slope out of all the different drugs, because it offers an incredible escape from the pain. It's such I've never been a fan of that type of escape personally. It's not something that added a lot of value to my life. But what I saw was that every time he would make this choice, it would give this temporary solution to the pain, which was his life, and that was about how he grew up, how his relationship with his family, the relationship with his friends, and it was the short-term escape. But at the same time, because you're doing heroin, because heroin is becoming part of your life and a daily ritual that you're mentally and physically addicted to, every time you shoot up, your life actually gets that much shittier.
Yes.
And so it created this incredible downward spiral where the escape from the pain, this temporary escape from the pain, is creating a longer term pain that's just going to kind of keep producing more pain in perpetuity throughout your entire existence until you hit that rock bottom point. And unfortunately, the rock bottom point for many of these people is death. I've held people in my arms that were overdosing from heroin, and I've seen them, stare into the oblivion and wonder if they were going to come back or not. And it's a kind of experience that never leaves you. Yeah. And it's unfortunate that it's such an incredible epidemic, and that we're part of a culture and a society that does such a marvelous job at developing and creating more pain for ourselves.
Yeah, it's also from coming from the artistic community. I've noticed that substance use is, it's fully integrated into the entire all the whole entertainment industry. And I think one of the, as you kind of touched on earlier, is that it also, drugs are used to get over issues such as social anxiety, which I think is something that a lot of entertainers deal with when they're dealing with so many different people and everything's so freely available. And it's something that kind of helps, because when you stop caring about what people think of you, it's really easy to gravitate towards using substances as a tool to be an entertainer and to be in the public eye and to deal with tons of different people.
Well, do you think it's people, but do you think it's that they don't care about what people think, or that they do care? Because it seems to me like the anguish of judgment is more a cause of people turning to drugs than the freedom of not caring what other people think. You know, I mean, maybe it's just a semantical argument, but, you know, I mean, let's bring it home to our group. Like, let's talk about, you know, the people
sure,
I
that we
think
live with.
Something kind of Rab mentioned, and I think this is true too, and something I think is worth mentioning, is that as far as I think it's very obviously and statistically, you can see that there's a much a higher percentage of artists that are drawn towards an addictive mentality. And from what I, you know, when I went through my addictions and when I went through my recovery of that, I put a lot of focused attention on figuring that out. You know, when you really start getting to the core of like, why is this something that I'm so drawn to, and why is this something that so many other creatives are drawn to too? And there's a myriad of reasons, but something that really helped give me perspective on it was kind of understanding the balance in the psyche and the nature of self-destruction. And what I found from what was true for me is that, and I live a life that has an abundant amount of creation. As an artist, I'm always creating things. I'm taking electricity and pixels and turning it into landscapes that your imagination can journey into. Every day, I'm actually producing something from almost nothing. And I found that for myself, that huge output of creation, that the balance and the shadow of that, of any creation, is destruction. Your psyche will find a way to balance the different forces. And for me, the destruction that I was balancing was self-destruction of myself through the use of these chemicals and drugs and stimulants and whatever was available at the time, honestly, was an amazing way for my subconscious to exercise that destruction. And I was the easiest target for that. And so destroying myself was always more convenient than destroying anything else. And it was only through the awareness of that understanding was I able to make some kind of peace with that. But it's something that, you know, that when you're an addict, you're going to grapple with that every day. It's not something, I wouldn't call it a disease, even though I guess it's socially contagious. I do see it's still a choice, and it's part of what defines us. You know, I think if you the people, I remember going to AA, and one thing that I always found that interesting is that, man, recovering addicts were some of the coolest people I'd ever met. You know, if you can, it's kind of like doubling up in Galaga, if anyone even gets that reference at all. But if you can take on an addiction and you can overcome it, I think it adds to it's such a powerful aspect of developing your identity. I always found that people that had overcome an addiction are people I'd rather spend time with than, say, some people who have never had to deal with that at all. It definitely is it's a great personality builder.
That's right. All right, we're going to come back and finish this discussion because this is getting pretty interesting here. You're listening to The Midnight Sunrise. I'm your host, Charles Shaw. I'm here with Android Jones and Random Reb, and you're listening to us live streaming on kmhd2.org. We'll be back in just a second.
I just want I crush the fear of fear, of fear, of fear, of fear, of
Hi, welcome back to the Midnight Sunrise. We were talking about addiction and the death of Phillip Seymour Hoffman last week during our inaugural show, and we were starting to get into some of the kind of the problems and the experiences that we've had with addiction. But one of the things I wanted to talk about here is our extended community and the role of drugs and addiction in our community. And one of the things that I've come across, coming into the community about 7-8 years ago, after only a few years after kicking this crack addiction, is that there was no real acknowledgement of addiction or its existence, and it was all hidden, and it still remains hidden. It's something that people aren't very compassionate about, I find. I see that we have friends that are struggling with this all the time, and they're talked about, but they're rarely ever talked to about it. I see, rumors circulate all the time. I've definitely been the victim of some of those. It's easy to pick on a former addict and, accuse them of things. But what we don't have is any type of healthy adult discussion about it. And I'm curious, why you guys think that is. Why is it that if we're supposed to be a supportive community that's helping each other out, why aren't we helping each other when we're stumbling and falling, when we're in pain, and when we're suffering from addiction? What do you think, Rob?
Well, I think, I remember when I was a kid, and I wanted to be in the music business, how much I admired, all my idols were heroin addicts. And I thought it was really cool. I thought that I romanticized it in my mind that, like, I had never tried drugs, but I thought they were really cool. Like when I was a teenager, I kind of fantasized about doing them, and I had no access to them at that time in my life, thankfully. But I think that romantic idea of drug usage in our scene is huge. And I think that there are some of course, there can be benefits to using certain types of substances to access different parts of our consciousness, but it's such a delicate balance that it's not something I would ever recommend, especially in a forum like this. But it's a fine line, and I think that there's a real sense of denial within our community that I think people don't really want to face that and say that, because it's not all bad, and it's not, but there is bad there, but people want to be able to use their drugs and not feel guilty about it. So I don't think people really want to talk about it.
Yeah,
but I mean, I know for myself, as far as kind of my relationship with that in this community,
before that and kind of outside college, I was like a closet psychedelic warrior. I had a video game studio that I had started in San Francisco. We had 25 employees, another like 25, 30 employees in our offices in Shanghai. And my use, and we can make a distinction on later shows between drugs and psychedelics, but for the mainstream, I guess I'll kind of lump it together. But for me, it was my appreciation and my use of these kind of substances was something that I had to hide. I was ashamed of, because the people that I was interacting with didn't accept it and didn't understand it. And when I first kind of fell into this community, it was I went to a visionary art show that actually Robert Venosa, a friend of mine, invited me to in San Francisco. And for the first time in my life, it was like I felt like this incredible homecoming, where I found there was actually a niche of art called visionary art, and it was kind of just love at first blush for me. And I remember times, going to Burning Man, going to different events where I thought that the name of the game was kind of who can do the most drugs and still kind of maintain control and not pass out, in front of your friends, because it was something that the access was so easy. And it was kind of a matter of fact, in a way.
Yeah, it's a matter of fact, but we also, I mean, I'm sure you've experienced this as well. There's times when, somebody will frantically start calling you up because they need a ride or they can't afford their camp fees or they can't do this, but they show up with enough drugs to kill the 5th Regiment, right? It's about prioritization, you know?
Yeah, well, and it's an epidemic that unfortunately, you know, is only getting worse and worse. And I think that Rab and any of us can kind of talk to this. Just in the past, you know, 6-7 years that I've been, you know, actively performing at events and festivals, you know, I think just within the past 5 years, I've seen a dramatic rise in the amount of substance abuse and the intensity, and even in its structure. I mean, you know, we're living in, I think it's even a couple of years ago, Rab and I kind of talk about, you know, I don't know when it happened, but, you know, apparently, you know, DMT is an acceptable dance floor drug now. I mean, even when we're, you know, when we're doing Phaedroid shows, I mean, I can't tell you, I can't do a show in the Midwest or anywhere really on the West Coast where before we start up, I guess somewhere along the lines, you know, what we do, for people that don't know, Phaedroid, it's a very psychedelic kind of inspired type of a dance performance with my wife Phaedra and I doing these visuals. And apparently somewhere along the line, the word got out that if you witness, it's only like a 5 to 10 minute show, which is kind of the perfect amount of time for a DMT trip. But word got out that if you do we try to make the show impressive enough when you're sober, but I guess some people need a little bit extra. And it's gotten to this pattern where as I'm starting up, about to do a show, like without fail, I'll smell this this riff of DMT throughout the dance floor. And this is, I mean, it's really alarming. It's something that where it concerns me is, one, that, you know, I mean, if you choose to have your personal conversation with God in the middle of a Spangle show or a Tipper show, I mean, I guess that's your business. I'd like to think that, you know, I hold things like that. I'm out of just sheer terror. I would be terrified to ever enter a realm like that in the middle of lightning in a bottle. To each his own. But where I think it's particularly disturbing is that, you know, I mean, I care about this community. I care about, you know, I care about the morals and the ethics and the values and the culture that, you know, we're all trying to create collectively. But I'm very concerned that if you're 18 or you're 20 years old and you go to a show and you watch Phaedroid and Tipper and you're on DMT and ketamine and acid at the same time, I mean, what do you have to look forward to in your 30s?
Right.
I mean, you're basically mainlining, you know, as much dopamine as the universe is capable of providing to one individual all at once. It's just, I think the pharmacological fallout of basically prescription-based drugs and antidepressants that this is actually creating has the potential to be really catastrophic in the long term.
Yeah, but you know, it's interesting. The counter argument to that, Andrew, is if you look back at the reports from Burroughs and from Ginsberg and Leary when they were exposed to Yahe and to DMT for the first time, they all hated it. You know, Metzner hated it. They said it was too intense. They didn't enjoy it. And then our generation gets introduced to it through kind of McKenna, who becomes, you know, the first real like proponent of it. And then, but yet, you know, if you look at it, I think you, me, and Rab, we kind of all share the same general feeling about it of, oh my God, I could never do it at a Spangle show or something like that. But now we're looking at kids that are, you know, 20 years, 15 years younger than us, and, you know, they're doing it upright at a Spangle show. What does that say about the evolution of the brain? You know?
Well, I think that there is something to be said that I think kids in general are more, they haven't seen all the darkness that this universe has to offer, and can do these substances when they're younger and not feel, I guess, terrified of the true reality of nature because they haven't experienced it yet. And I think as you get older, you can start to see how these substances can have a really negative long-term effect on your emotions and brain power. So I think it is a really dangerous trend because kids, I think, it is easier for kids to do really powerful substances and not feel the immediate negative effects. It's going to create a whole generation of slightly less capable thinkers, I think, because like Andrew hit it right on the head. It's just as I've been traveling around and playing these shows, the amount of drug use and the kind of how normal it is just to do all these combinations of really powerful drugs all at once with really young kids is really alarming. What used to be kind of like this thing that happened off on the side has become the main thing that's going on, and it makes me feel sometimes. I feel as a performer like guilty now because here I'm showing up at a festival and I encourage these kids to stay up all night and catch a sunrise set, and I think that a lot of kids think that the only way to get there is to do as many stimulants as possible to get there. And I look out on the dance floor sometimes and I feel horrible for what I've encouraged because it's I don't really think that it's the I do think that there is a place for psychedelic exploration in a conscious way. However, I don't think that is really what's happening, and I'm scared for what is going to happen to these kids.
It's unfortunate, I mean, that's what happens. We're growing up in a culture without shamans anymore. Where are the people that are? Yeah. Terrence passed a while ago, and I mean, Terrence was a huge part of my curiosity towards this subject. But we don't have a lot of leaders anymore that are there to help kind of shepherd individuals through this experience. And like I said before, I have such a huge debt towards the value that I have gotten out of psychedelics. And I think something that I want to do too is for the audience to make a distinction with what I think the psychedelic is actually one of the most misused words within our community. A lot of times it's used as an adjective to almost describe anything trippy, like, oh, that's a psychedelic rug or psychedelic artwork or it's a psychedelic t-shirt. If you look at the word psychedelic, as it is, psyche means the mind, and the delos is to visible or to clear and to make clear. So psychedelics means to make clear the mind, to clean the mind, to rinse the mind with water. And I want to, since we talked about this, I want to make it really clear that in the culture that we're in, that, like I said before, we're in the middle of one of the most complicated and far-reaching mind control, brainwashing civilizations of recorded history. Psychedelics are actually one of the few solutions and tools that we have to deprogram the deep programming that's been inflicted upon all of us. But what's important is psychedelics used with the intention of clearing the mind. And unfortunately, a lot of the counterculture community and festivals have, they've kind of kidnapped the psychedelics, and they're used in the way they're not intended to use. They're used in a way of decadence and hedonism, and just trying to just fill the void of emptiness. And it's really unfortunate. And
there's more too, Andrew, though. It's not just the void of emptiness. I mean, first of all, this is without even bringing up the role of LSD in the counterculture and what LSD did to the counterculture and how it shifted the counterculture back in the 60s and 70s. So that's a whole nother show in and of itself. But the substances, as we all know, can be used for good or bad. But what we're finding is that the aspects that lead to the greatest sense of pacifism and social control are the ones that are being exploited the most. And I bring up, by example, the absolute proliferation of empathogens in our culture, not just psychedelics, but specifically the MDMAs, the MDAs, the ayahuascas. You have people taking these, what they call the heart openers, right? But all they do is flood themselves with these drugs that turn them into, these beings that cannot handle any type of aggression or any type of conflict or criticism. All they want, all they can respond to is this kind of like bliss vibe or this love vibe. And what you do when you front load your psyche with only one emotional state is you create a starving shadow that needs to act out. And so because they won't acknowledge the shadow, because the shadow is so scary to so many people in this culture, all of that stuff gets sublimated. And when you sublimate all of your desires or your shadow or whatever, then that's when pathologies come out, right?
Yep, and then we create a ridiculous imbalance between the left and right brain hemispheres, and we propagate. One of the kind of the main New Age deceptions is the demasculinity of totally creating a culture of inaction. Yeah. And it creates the exact type of psychology of not wanting to take any action against the atrocities that we see in the world right now. And I'd love to say it was by accident, but I can't say that anymore.
It's not.
I can't imagine that this is an accident. This seems like it's just too perfect. It's too meditated. All the pieces fit together too perfectly to be anything but something that was, nefariously contrived for the subjugation and the castration of a group of people that should be fucking pissed off and making a difference right now with what's going on.
Well, absolutely, and we are now witnessing a time of the most drugged up generation of kids ever, whether it's by choice or by all the psychologists, and so there's so many kids now that are on all sorts of substances, and I feel so bad for them. I mean, I do, only in the most extreme cases should these substances be used, and it's just rampant everywhere. I don't know what we're up against in the future.
Well, I'll tell you,
because of this.
We're going to take a break here, but just as a final, thought on this, this is what happens when you have a large generation that has been promised so much, and who is finding out the reality that nothing that they were promised is actually going to come true. And the pain and the frustration of not being able to realize your dreams and to become financially independent, break away from your parents, and all of these things are creating a kind of a rebellious instinct. And so if they can't have a job and they can't do anything productive with their life, they just want to go blow themselves out. And I don't blame them, because if I didn't have anything else going on, I would probably just want to have a lot of fun too. But just remember this, folks, no matter what you do, you can't love the problems of the world away. You have to take action. All right, we'll be right back in a minute on Midnight Sunrise. Welcome back to the Midnight Sunrise. I'm your host, Charles Shaw. I'm here with Android Jones and Random Rab, your three musketeers of absurdity. We're talking about drug use right now, and we've been talking about drug use in the alternative culture and the generational differences in between. I can also say, you guys, and I'm sure you can support this and support me on this, is that our culture also kind of, because of the workload that it puts on people, when we have to produce festivals, or when us touring artists have to show up show after show or presentation after presentation, is that the culture itself facilitates our use of things that maybe sometimes we would not necessarily choose. I know that the only time that I've really, gotten into the stimulant game since I really gave up the whole crack thing was when I had to, stay up for 3 days at a time, building theme camps at a festival. And, for me, that became something that was like very unhealthy because, I'm in my 40s. I've been through all this before and I don't want to go through that. And yet, does the show go on if, you aren't working, 36 hours straight? Does the culture really allow us to treat ourselves well?
First world problems.
First world problems. Yes. Do we have to take so many drugs when we work?
Oh my God.
Life is so hard.
Life is so terrible. What am I gonna do?
It's really.
What if I don't get the...
It's pathetic, isn't it? It's totally pathetic.
Our camp didn't have the right placement. What are we gonna do?
Hey, that coconut isn't right. Those aren't the right coconuts. They're not from Guatemala. They're not fair trade.
Organic?
And yet they'll shovel any drug that any stranger gives them up their nose, down their throat, up their butt as fast as humanly possible. I don't know. When was the first time that you learned about a drug overdose at a festival?
Gosh, it seems like an ingrained part of the whole culture. I think it's gotten much more personal as the time goes on because I've gotten to know more and more people. And well, of course, I'm sure all of us. I know we all know people that have died because of drug overdoses at this point personally.
Yep. Well, hey, Rab, do you mind talking a little bit about what the impact of Tifa's passing was on the community and what happened behind that? I mean, was there discussion going on about what happened? Like, you were on the front lines of that, and without, with all respect to Tifa and all of that, what can you tell us about that experience?
Well, I can, that was back when we were doing the El Circo thing, and kind of like what you were describing, we kept setting ourselves up as a troupe of artists to do these insane hours and do all these insane projects and work so hard, and it seemed that the only answer was to do drugs and lots of them. And we all went into that place. And, at first it was really fun. And then I think that there was a time when everyone sort of kind of needed to bubble out of that and go in and get away from it. So I think but I think we were all kind of living under this illusion that we were all immortal and no one, we were all, responsible drug users and no one was going to get hurt. And then when Tifa overdosed, I think it was a real wake-up call. Unfortunately, it was such a harsh wake-up call that it kind of just dissolved everything in a way from that, and different elements branched off to do different things. But I think that the discussion, it never was able to see itself through because her passing just kind of ended it, and then other people came up and started doing whatever in its place. But I do think that behind the scenes that it really affected a lot of people's usage, and a lot of people it didn't, and they continued to use. It didn't make a difference at all.
And what about the void that was created when she died? I mean, she was a force. She was a leader. She was a visionary. And what about the psychological effect of that?
Oh, it was devastating to anyone who knew her. It was an absolutely devastating. And we felt. Because she was just getting going, she was.
Oh man, she's ramping up.
And for the people out there who don't know who we're talking about, Rab, just explain really quick who we're talking about.
Well, we're talking about Tifa, the designer who.
And Tifa Nova, N-O-V-O-A.
Yeah, Novoa. That was
just
her.
Google, you can Google her. You can Google her right now, and it's this isn't just a name we're referring to. I worked a lot with Tifa. We had some projects and we're involved. I'd go down to Bali to work with her, and she was one of the most incredible artists that I've ever met in my life. I mean, just such a dynamic force of creativity that came out of her. I mean, really, and you can even still see the mark that she made. I mean, the reason people wear if you ever see a feather in someone's hair, the reason that's there is because of Tifa. Yeah. She radically changed the visual landscape. I mean, the whole feather leather culture came out of just an aspect of Tifa's work. Yeah. And just not only was she an incredible artist, she was just an amazing human being. And yeah, kind of like Rab said, when that news hit, it created this shockwave and this massive void for everyone. You know, we all still miss her. We're all still hurting because Tifa's not with us anymore. I mean, she was one of the main leaders of what we were doing. You know, everyone looked up to Tifa and wanted to know more about her and what she was expressing.
And what's so terrible about this is that addiction, you know, is continually used as a force of destruction, particularly in our culture. I mean, let's just forget COINTELPRO and assassinations and all of that. Just look at the amount of key figures, including Phillip, who just died last week. How many key artists died of drug overdoses? How many movement leaders died of drug overdoses? And what that did to the causes and the art and you know, the beliefs that drove these people and drove their fans. And it's devastating. And what happens is people run and hide, you know, rather than circling the wagons and everybody checking in with each other and taking care of each other and saying, who else is struggling right now? Who else needs help? We don't want to lose another one of you. Instead, everybody freaks out. Everybody gets scared. Everybody bails. And, you know, they had a beautiful memorial for Tifa, and there have been a lot of wonderful things said about her, but gosh, did anybody know that she was suffering? You know, I mean, I didn't know. Did you know, Rab?
I don't really know if I would call it suffering.
I wouldn't call it suffering either.
So it was totally just recreational drug use then.
Yeah, I think exactly what it was. I think it was also a mistake. It was an
accident.
It was an accident where she was doing a substance that she thought she was doing something else, but you know that's the.
So this wasn't.
Yeah,
she didn't have a
this
problem.
Wasn't a cry for
no,
help.
it wasn't a. Yeah, exactly. It was a mistaken. You know, she ended up doing some sort of powerful opiate, not knowing that that's what it was.
Okay.
But you know, it's not like she didn't think. It's not like it was a complete accident. She knew she was doing something.
Yeah. And to be fair, too, you know, were we to live in a culture like our friends in Portugal, or be in a part of the festival culture like Psytrance, where there is integrated harm reduction and there's drug education, it's quite possible that people would be educated so that they wouldn't take something that they didn't know. But unfortunately, we're in this kind of hush-hush secretive culture that doesn't allow us to talk about these things. Burning Man won't allow a harm reduction center on the festivals. Most of the other festivals can't get permits if they have harm reduction centers. The police are all over them if they do have a harm reduction center. So what kind of message is that, you know, is that handing out to people? It says, go hide. It says, go hide and do your stuff.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to, you know, I know some people in San Francisco who are wrapped up into doing cocaine, and one of these guys decided to get a testing kit to test the cocaine that they had been doing, and it turned out they had 0% cocaine in it. It was a cocktail of amphetamines and different types of numbing agents. So here all these guys were basically hooked on something. They had no idea even really what it was. And I think that the lesson in that for sure is if you don't know the guy who made this white powder, don't stick it in your body, people. Amen. It's just not worth it.
Amen.
No, it's not. And the amount of things you can get over the internet now too, with zero accountability whatsoever, is pretty terrifying. You know, I mean, it's just like to understand, and something too that's helped me within all this. You know, I'm someone that's done almost everything on the planet at one point in time, but what I've come to understand too is that you know, there's no more powerful psychedelic than human consciousness. I mean, it is the most amazing drug around, and just as chemical evidence for that, you know, if you can look at a molecule like the LSD molecule or the DMT molecule, and you know, it's a beautiful, elegant. I mean, just the molecular structure, like the way that it's composed. There's different. I've got a program on my iPhone where you can look up any of these atomical structures and spin them around and see them, and you know, they're nice. But you know, look at the chemical compound of adrenaline. You know, it's like this massive fractal plant and bush just bursting with complexity. And what's important to understand too is that a lot of these things, they're keys that unlock something,
But the human body is, I mean, it's a cornucopia of its own, like, miraculous pharmaceutical development. And I think that's what's, unfortunately, a lot of times people feel that they become addicted because they need to find an external way of tapping into something that's deep inside of themselves.
And, you know, we got to wrap up our show here, guys, and I want to thank you for, once again, throwing down heavy on some pretty difficult topics. But, you know, we don't want to leave you without any possible solutions or anything like that. And I think we should rip a playbook from Bucky Fuller here, who said, you know, when the existing institutions don't work, create your own. There's lots of people out there that'll help you set up a harm reduction center and have a drug testing kit. There's Dance Safe. There's all kinds of stuff. If the festival or whoever won't let you do it out in the open and legally, do it anyway, and just let everybody know. And take your own steps to make yourself safer if you're going to do this stuff, you know. You don't have to, but if you're going to, be smart about it and talk to your friends about it. Any last words from you two gentlemen before we sign off for the evening?
I don't know, man. Just rest in peace, Tifa.
Yeah.
We love you so much. And,
Absolutely.
You know, love to her and her whole family.
This is an epidemic, and we got to get smarter about it. And we can be smarter about it. We've learned enough. It's been 60 years of this drug experimentation. We know now. We can be better.
And there's, you know, I think we all need to really just take care of each other, and there's nothing better than a hug.
Yeah.
Really.
On that note, we are giving Radioland one gigantic transmitted, broadcasted super hug from the road here. Say goodbye, gentlemen. Thank you very much for listening to the Midnight Sunrise #2, the F.U.B.A.R Report. We'll be back next week. You are streaming live here on KMHD2.org. Thanks for coming out, everyone.